Good evening, everyone. Hi, my name is Letitia Crippen. I will be your host this evening, and on behalf of Bright Hope Baptist Church, I would like to thank each and every one of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us on this wonderful day. Tonight, we have an amazing panel, and our event is titled What Would King Do? And we will be imagining what would Dr. King do or say if he was here with us during these troubling times during the COVID-19 pandemic. Today's event is brought to you by Bright Hope Baptist Church initiative called Bright Hope Cares. And Bright Hope Cares is a COVID-19 vaccination education reduction strategy that really taps into making sure that the North Philadelphia community has access to the COVID-19 vaccine and the information that they need to make sure that they are keeping their communities safe. So, on behalf of the church, I would also like to thank Temple University for sponsoring this event and supporting our need to serve the community. So, tonight's objective, it's a service event. A lot of people are working and doing amazing things to serve their communities. And today, we are not just talking, but we're just like Dr. King is about action. So I'm asking everyone, go grab your pen, your pad, because we are going to give you some great steps that we expect everyone to put in action after tonight. So, before we go into our first guest, which is, I just can't wait to bring him up, we are going to have some fun tonight. We're going to be giving away some copies of Dr. King's last book. And so I want everyone to stay tuned, stay engaged, hang in with us because you can win your very own free copy. So hit us up in the chat. Let us know where you're tuning in from. And certainly, let's keep the conversation going. So, allow me to bring up our first guest. I want to introduce you to the senior pastor of Bright Hope Baptist Church. Pastor Reverend Dr. Darren McKinney is an accomplished activist, community leader, often sought after to discuss public policy and give leadership to the community. He's a member of the 2013 class of the Board of Preachers of the Martin Luther King Jr. International College of Ministers and Laity of Morehouse College, and he joined Bright Hope Baptist Church in October of 2017, and their congregation has been so blessed ever since he's joined us. So, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce to you the senior pastor of Bright Hope Baptist Church, Reverend Dr. Darren McKinney. Hi, Pastor.
Hi, Sister Griffin. Thank you for those beautiful words. I'm going to have to pay you a love gift for those kind words and remarks.
Oh, well, you know what? Thank you so much for all the work that you've been doing in Philadelphia.
Yes.
So, when we start off our events for Bright Hope, we have to keep things in order. So, I'm going to ask you to lead us in prayer, Pastor.
Sure. You ready?
I'm ready.
God, we thank you so very much for this time that you allow us to engage in critical conversation about our beloved community. Lord, as we begin to look through the lenses of one who loved you and served the world at large, and even from a global perspective, God, we ask that we're allowed to see things from his perspective, but more so through your lenses of social justice and advocacy. Bless each person who shall partake and participate in tonight's dialogue. We ask that those who are listening will be able to grab a hold to nuggets on how best they can serve their communities at large. We give you glory, honor, and praise for allowing us to have this moment of encounter. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen, amen, and amen. Thank you, Pastor. I always, when we start off in prayer, it always just sets a really nice tone for
Absolutely.
everything. Awesome. So I want to start our discussion by sharing with our viewers the long history that Bright Hope Baptist Church has with Dr. King.
Hmm.
A lot of people may not know Dr. King loved Philly. He
Yeah.
came to Philly all the time. He did a lot of great work here with the preachers in Philadelphia. And so I want to get into a little bit of that. Also, your history around what you've all been doing for the service day. We know right now it is a really troubling time for us. And normally we be, out there moving and grooving, but we act with wisdom here and we want to make sure we keep everyone safe. So take me back to the service projects that the church has done in the past on this special day.
Sure. Before I jump in that, can I just tell a brief history about the work of our church?
Absolutely.
For 112 years, Bright Hope has been a social political institution that is concerned about the disenfranchisement of humanity. We're a place of hope for people who need bright hope. And our story history has been one that has been blessed to have six pastors. Our founding pastor, Reverend James Kamek, then it was for 82 consecutive years, we were blessed with the prophetic leadership of Dr. William H. Gray Sr., Dr. William H. Gray Jr., and Congressman William H. Gray III. We were so blessed to have those personalities for 82 years, and then there followed them was Pastor Reverend Dr. Kevin Johnson and myself. A relationship ensued in 1949 with Dr. Gray Jr., with Dr. Martin Luther King and their families. King would frequently preach and visit our church. In 1958, he shared numerous of sermons, and when I was shared about this sermon nugget, it really blessed me. In 1958, King preached at our church. He made a statement that segregation is dead, but the time of the funeral hasn't been fixed yet. Now
Mm.
that's tweetable and it's still livable, and I'm going to use that and give him credit for it. And then in 1963, we had the opportunity to move into our new facility or our current facility, and Martin King Jr. was there to share the sermon and be a part of the groundbreaking ceremony. Bright Hope has always been in the vernacular of the new generation, a woke church. Bright Hope has always been that had embodied the wokeness, if you would. We're the first church that I know of that has a black stained glass window of Jesus.
Ooh, and it is gorgeous, amazing. If you guys have not visited Bright Hope Baptist Church, it is what not only is the pastor amazing to go check out, but I've never seen anything like it in my life.
Absolutely. And Congressman Gray, along with our great members, really wanted to embody the blackness, our blackness, to reveal to the community and to congregants that Jesus really has an affinity with the black experience. But more importantly, Jesus was a man of color. The Bible says his feet was like burnt like bronze, or brass rather. His hair was like lamb's wool. If Freddie Haynes was here, he'll say that's the type of hair you put Ampro gel in. Because Jesus was a man of color. So,
Mhm.
with that history coming on to an organization like Bright Hope, it is very important for us to continue the work of social justice and advocacy. And we've done a lot of things for King Day. We've did community cleanings, even within the church and outside of the church, to make sure that our neighborhoods have beautification. We've made sure that we push people to vote. Voting is very critical. We did voter registration drives and passed our voter information. We volunteer with the free library to make sure that individuals could see people and feel people of their color who were articulate and who could read. That's very important for our community. We also partnered with Girard College to ensure that we was able to be present to host job fairs, civic engagement opportunities, book distributions, and again, reading to our children there. Bright Hope has always been a part of the community, and that's something that Bright Hope is proud of, to be at one with our community.
Mhm. Thank you for that. That was a great lesson in history. That is just I always say when you go into Bright Hope, you feel the history, you feel the legacy of our people in that building. So let's talk a little bit about you mentioned community and what you all have been doing for the community, and this concept of kingdom work, right? That we talk about and how we're making sure that we are really in making an impact, a meaningful impact in our community. What does that look like in 2022 versus how you all have approached that in the 1960s? What message do you have for our church community?
Yeah, I think the biggest thought in my mind's eye is simply this: do the work that God has assigned to your hands. We know that the 60s juxtaposed to now is strikingly different. We have very varying opportunities to articulate and use our bully pulpits as platforms to speak to those critical issues, unlike during the eras of King and Jesse Jackson, Stokely Carmichael, Malcolm X. During that era, the platforms were really limited. Now we have various platforms that we really could utilize to ensure that we're becoming the beloved community. Martin King often said this, that our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. It is very important for us as a faith community to become that beloved community that speak up to the social ills of our community. So I would just say to my colleagues and other parachurch organizations to use the pulpit and the platform that you have, that God has entrusted you with.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Pastor. And so, what can we look forward to in the future from Bright Hope Baptist Church as it relates to your kingdom work?
Sure, we've done significant things pre-COVID, and even during COVID. We've had a great connection to ensure with our community that we are being the church, not just being focused on us internally, but looking out to make sure that the needs of our community are met. Annually we give away school uniforms, school supplies. We make sure that during winter months we give away winter coats to neighboring schools. We've done a great job with partnering with entity in which when I came on Bright Hope, I assumed that this belonged to Bright Hope, but it actually is Bright Hope Pregnancy Support Center. We partnered with Bright Hope Pregnancy Support Center to support those mothers there. We, for Thanksgiving, made sure that our communities were fed with turkey drives, and we fed the community. Those are some of the things that we did pre-COVID. During COVID, we tried to make sure that as many churches, we had to pivot from church as usual. Consequently, we had to re-envision what our witness and our work of our church would really be about. And to that end, we've become intentional about reducing the health disparities and food insecurities that came along with COVID. We became a COVID vaccination site,
Mhm.
in that we are making sure that individuals have access to the vaccine. And we became also testing site as well. And we've partnered with varying partners in our community to feed entities to ensure that we're reducing the food insecurities in our community. Weekly, we feed through our survivor program and offer hot meals, and we offer fresh produce during the course of the on Friday. So those are some of the things from a food insecurity and a healthcare disparity position that we undertook. And we've also made it in our purpose to speak to those critical issues when it comes to our city and our nation. We've hosted roundtable discussions with Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester, who is from Philly but now resides in Delaware. She's out of Bright Hope. Her grandmother, Helen Blunt, was a faithful member that served on our nurses ministry. Congresswoman Rochester was baptized in the church, so she's part of
Wow.
the church. We hosted many town hall meetings with state, local, federal legislators to ensure that the social political issues are addressed. So in this year, we're going to remain intentional about how we care and minister our community, because we have to be the voice for the voiceless.
I could not agree more. So much rich history, so many boots on the ground getting the work done. And thank you so much for your leadership and continuing on with Bright Hope's mission. I'm going to slightly pivot because I promised people that I was going to give away some free things. So you're going to hang out with me, Pastor, because we're going
Please.
to give out a book and I want to challenge some of the viewers' knowledge. Okay, guys? So put your thinking caps on. I'm going to ask a question. This is simple trivia. I'm going to ask a question. The first person that puts the answer to that question in the chat, our production team in the back, the first name that they see, you get the prize. And then we will give you instructions on how to claim your copy of the book. So this is the easy one. I'm starting off with the easy one, Pastor. Okay. I'm not going to go too hard on them on this first round. So, how many children does Dr. King have? And what are their names?
Uh-oh.
Okay. How many children? I I can tell you two of them because I see them in the forefront a lot, but I tell you what, I do not know all of it. Do you know the answer to this, Pastor?
I know some of them. I know some of them. I know he has a number of children. So I don't know all their names, but I
Mm-hmm.
think I can articulate some of their names.
Some of their names. So we're going to give folks an opportunity to put that in the chat and see who we can give away this first copy of the book to, because it's really important, as I've learned in preparing for this. It's really important that we sink our teeth into the history of Dr. King, because so often in school we kind of, go gloss over the surface, and there's so much that he's done. There's so much we all don't know about him. And so when you really can get into his writings, read some of his speeches, you really get a good opportunity to see who he was and what he truly stood for and what he was really fighting for.
Mm-hmm.
So, mhm. Awesome, awesome. So I'm gonna let some of those come into the chat. Okay, Rosa. Okay, Bernice, Dexter, Yolanda, and MLK Jr. I knew about MLK Jr.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I definitely knew about him. Congratulations, Rosa. To claim your book, all you have to do is email bhcarescommunication@gmail.com. Give us your name, your address. Let us know where we can send your book to, and we will make sure we get that information to you. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So I am going to move us right along and bring up our panel, Pastor. I hear a lot of people say, "Oh, we don't have a leader, and the Black community needs a leader." And I would argue that there are remnants of Dr. King all over, and so I like to call this panel "Descendants of King," people who are really continuing on to do the work. And so, are you ready to help me bring up our panel, Pastor? You see,
Yes,
I'm
please.
making you my co-host, my honorary co-host.
I'm honored. I'm honored.
Awesome, awesome. So our first guest, um, he's one of my favorites. If you're from Philadelphia, you've probably seen him in the news quite a bit these days. He is always standing up for the young people and making sure that we are well informed as it relates to their development and brain development. And so, my first guest that I would like to bring up is the owner of Human Nature, Mr. Michael O'Brien.
Thank you.
Hey, Mike, how are you?
How are you? That
Good
was so
evening.
good evening, sir. Thank you for having me.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
Thank you for joining us, Mike. Okay, our next guest, this gentleman, he is super duper smart. Super smart. Everyone on the panel, we've seen him in so many places. He's coming out of Temple University and Lewis Katz College. And when I talk about somebody who really gets it and knows how to reach the young people and how we really are going to take health and policy and make sure that we're doing the right things for the community, I want to bring up our next guest. He's a trainer, he's a mentor, he's a lot of things to a lot of people in Philadelphia, Mr. Brandon Brown.
Greetings and salutations. Thank you
Welcome.
for such the kind words.
How you doing, Brandon?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well.
I'm so happy to have you here with us this evening.
Thank you.
I know all these people, I'm going to just keep saying, oh, he's one of my favorites. I really like this person. But it's really true, because when you really get to know our panel this evening, you just can't get enough. My next guest, I have been crushing on this woman for quite some time, following her journey. When we talk about Black girl magic, she is it. I want to bring up our next panelist, Philadelphia's own Judge Tamika Lane.
Oh, thank you. You are so kind. Hi, guys. Thanks for having me.
Judge.
Good
Hi,
evening. Good evening. Good evening.
Judge Lane. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. And then lastly, he's the director of fatherhood and family initiative here in Philadelphia. He's joining us from Atlanta, but do not be mistaken. He is a West Philly native. I want to bring up one half of the award-winning syndicated radio talk show, Those Baxters, Mr. Juan Baxter.
Hey everybody, what's going on? How you doing,
What's going
Pastor?
on, sir?
All right, I'm glad to be on this. Thank you for that. Like, look, I'm here. I guess I'm the loud and wild one. So I'm here. I'm the energy guy. Let's go.
All of the energy, and look, everyone knows, those of you who've seen my events in the past, I am hype. I'm bringing the energy. Juan's bringing it, and we all, Pastor, we get him riled up enough, he's definitely going to bring the energy. So I need everyone in our chat to bring the energy. Welcome our guests. I want to see your emojis in the chat, your dancing ladies, your fires, your bombs, your hands clapping. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our panel. Okay. So I just want to reset the stage, guys, because today we're about action. We're not just going to sit here, talk about, what we think. And we're super, all of us are super smart. But what we are definitely going to do is give everyone some tangible steps that they can put into action after they leave here today. And so the first thing that I want to touch on is, it is no secret that Dr. King was a young man doing amazing things for the world, for the United States of America, for his communities. And so when we think about young people and the impact that they really have, those freedom fighters, everyone that was following him, those were kids, right? They were high school students, they were college students. And so when I think about our future kings, those are young people. And they can really start to make an impact today. A lot of them are making a huge impact today. And I know a lot of folks on our panel have spent time with young people and shaping their minds, giving them hope, giving them guidance. And so my first question is, what does mentorship look like for our future kings, so we can really nurture them? What does that look like in 2022? And I say that because we are in COVID. It is different. And we cannot approach the work the same way that we have in the past. So I want to throw that question first over to Mr. Brandon. What does that look like for us in 2022?
So I might take a little. That's a beautiful question, but I'm going to say that there's not really that much different than what you do now than what we were doing pre-COVID.
Okay.
The manner might change, but I think the system is still the same. So what do I suggest? I suggest that you give them a forum, you give them a space, right? You let that be a safe space. You let that be a vulnerable space where they can sit down and try to figure things out, right? I think the second thing is that adults have to learn how to step back. Right? Because oftentimes what happens, adults will create the space, invite the young people, and then they'll say, no, you shouldn't do that. So oftentimes, if you're going to create the space, you need to make sure that you step back. Right? And I think the other thing is that you figure out what empowers them, not what makes you happy. Right? So, and this isn't an indictment, but I just think that oftentimes when you look at spaces, the adults create the space, the adults create the agenda, but then they have a tendency to be upset when young people aren't participating. When all we have to ask is a simple question: did you encourage young people to be a part of this space? Right? Because if you don't give them meaningful opportunities to participate, if you don't give them high expectation, you're just going to be sitting in a room by yourself.
Sitting in a
So
room by yourself. And Mike, you have a long history of creating spaces for young people. What does that look like when we are inviting them in and allowing them to shape what that space looks like?
Yeah. So it can look a lot of ways, right? I agree with Brandon 100%, right? There's some prerequisites that need to be present amongst the adults. Like a lot of time, adults need training in letting go, right? They need training in sharing power. They need training because we've all been socialized to power in very particular ways, right?
Mhm.
And a lot of times, what we call power looks like tyranny, really, right? Like we're totalitarian. We're like, oh, I got all the control. Did you roll your eyes at me? It gets a little wild when teenagers need to be teenagers and toddlers need to be toddlers, right? Like I expect teenagers to say something slick. I did. Luckily, people didn't throw me out of rooms and go like, Michael Bryan, you're done forever, right? They let me know it wasn't okay, right? I don't have the right to create harm, but there was enough training amongst the adults to create plenty of space for us to be young people and to make mistakes. And the conversation also didn't start with me, and I do this with other young people. It doesn't start with pull up your pants. There's such the respectability politics things has maneuvered its way to such a centralizing spot and an organizing principle in how we think about building relationships. And that includes the political spectrum as well. And it's fascinating to me that if you look at folks who care about particular kinds of issues and have to organize getting people, whether they're young people, their peers, et cetera, organize getting them involved. For people that don't talk or think the way we do here, I don't hear those relationships when I go dig in that world. I don't hear it starting with like, hey, you, welcome, don't do these things, right? It actually starts a lot more open to encourage them to stay present and to stick with you. And over time, you start shifting bit by bit the kind of behaviors you want to see or you hope someone would adopt. And I think that's a big mistake we make with young people is like, it starts with a judgment of who they are and a judgment of culture. And I don't think adults know that, like, when you're like, pull up your pants is the first thing, that's what they're hearing, right? And we got to be careful of that.
We have to be
Can I
extremely
comment?
careful. Sure, Judge.
I'm sorry. I just when I think of mentorship, I think of the youth, but I also think of adults too. I have plenty of people that I mentor who have, they may be in college now, they may have graduated trying to figure out life, as well as young kids. I don't think we should just limit it to that because we all need mentorship. No one got to where they were alone. We all had a whole village helping us and raising us. But what I think is important is consistency. You need to be consistent and you need to be present. And I totally agree with you guys said that you have to listen and you have to accept them for where they are because you guys are going to grow together. Because although you're sharing and helping them, they're helping you too. I learned so much in my mentorships, and I'm like, wow. So I think we have to be open to have those experiences so it can be reciprocal.
Absolutely. Mentorship goes both ways. Juan.
Yeah. And for me, it's all about who you partner with, who's mentoring you, like who's your mentor, like are y'all relatable? Like, do you relate to this person that you're trying to mentor? Can you give them what you need to give them? Because a lot of times, like Michael said, like we get in spaces and people like they want to mentor these students, but the first thing they do is judge them by telling them pull up your pants. You got to wear this and you got to do this. Like then you're not probably the person that's going to be a good fit with that student because first of all you coming in with your own pre-notions and judgments on what this child's supposed to look like or what this adult is supposed to do instead of helping groom them to be the perfect person that they want to be. Because in the end, it's all about who they want to be. Like we can instill anything that we want to instill in them, but it's still in the end, it's who do they want to be. And if they see something that they like in you, 9 times out of 10, they'll try to mimic what they see in you because the consistency, like you said, Judge, the consistency part is what gets them.
Yeah, I would agree. Mentorship, I've always been taught that it has to be the right fit. What strengths does that mentor have, coupled with the opportunities that you have, and how can we really make sure that this is a fruitful, reciprocal relationship? And I want to ask the pastor, how do you guys do it? Because let me tell you, Bright Hope has a very strong youth ministry. They have a basketball court in the church where young people come and really identify it as a safe space. And a lot of people would like to say that, oh, the church isn't really conducive to a young person's development. And I'm sure Bright Hope would beg to differ. So what's the secret sauce in getting the young people to come in and be engaged with the church?
Yeah, I just think that Mike, Brandon, Judge, and Juan has already answered it. I think the success is summed up with creating a space that children and youth are able to be children and youth without the dictatorship of adults to tell them. And I think also, Mike, not just pull up your pants, take your hat off, right?
Right.
All of those things would push them away, but also creating opportunities to nurture and grow parents as well. So I think the success for particularly our Saturn enrichment program many years ago, we've seen hundreds of individuals with our Saturday enrichment programs, as well as our medical program that we had that send individuals off to Florida A&M for with medical school there. But individuals were able to be who they are because they were surrounded by mentors who really poured into them, and it was a space that they were able to be their authentic selves.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you just brought up something that I thought of, Pastor, the parents and families, right? And how are we? And I want to also, I'm sorry, I take one step back. When I say young people, and I learned this from Mr. O'Brien, that's like 30 and down, right? We're still young people are not. You do not stop being young at the age of 18, at the age of 21. The brain is still developing. And so, just to make sure everybody understands that baseline context, young people can really extend past the age, beyond the age of 24. So, when we think about parenting, Juan, and the work that you do with fathers, you and your wife have a beautiful marriage and a family of your own. How do these concepts translate over into the family, and again, in the spirit of king, motivating our people, our young people, to be the best versions of themselves? What type of advice have you given to some of the fathers or the mothers who are really developing their skills as parents?
uh, for the past few years, I've been teaching parenting classes in the high schools. So that gives me opportunity to go in and talk to the young people who are new parents. Because most of them, if you ask them if they need parenting class, they'll tell you, "I know everything I need already need. I know everything I need to know already as a parent." I'm like, "You're 15. You got a new baby. You don't know everything. Like, you need some guidance." But what we find out later on is that they want the help. It's just they're so used to adulting them and not asking them, like, what do you need me to help you with? What do you need me to, like, what do you want me to learn? And what I learned is that the more I talk to them and the more I give them tools to put in their tool belt, they become better parents. And I still have students 3-4 years now down the line still call me, still ask me for advice, because once again, the consistency thing. I was the only adult in a life who kept the consistency and kept motivating them to be better parents. And what they need to do is also see examples of what a good parent looks like. Like in our neighborhoods, we lost those examples. We used to have a lot of married couples, but with this new age and this social media and this what is it called? The TV, where it's live TV, and they divorce every other day and get remarried. It gives our children a false sense of what marriage looks like, what a good relationship looks like. And what we need to do is go back to letting them see healthy relationships.
Mhm.
Like, you had your grandparents who were married 40, 50 years. You
Right.
had your aunt and uncle who were married these long periods. This will be 20 years for me and my wife. When I always say that to my students, they be like, "You've been married to the same woman for 20 years. Why wouldn't I be?" But
Right.
that is the culture that they're being taught.
Mm-hmm.
We
Mm-hmm.
have to retrain their minds. And we do that with consistency and giving them the truth in their face.
I definitely would agree. And that really makes me think about going again back to our communities. Communities, we like to think starts at the family. A lot of us don't come from your traditional family. And so when we think about COVID, community, vaccine, Bright Hope Cares, for those of you who are just tuning in, Bright Hope Baptist Church has an initiative called Bright Hope Cares. And this is a COVID-19 vaccination um, apprehension reduction strategy where we're really getting into our communities and helping them understand why is vaccination important, why, how does it impact you, but not only you but your community. And I want to pivot our conversation a little bit to how has how have we all seen in our respective spaces how the COVID-19 has impacted the work that we do. We've seen families, whole families succumb to the virus, and whole businesses and industries crumble because of the virus. And I just want to highlight some of the things that we've seen and how can we start to take steps to rebuild. And I want to throw that first question over to the judge. I can only imagine how the courts have been impacted by COVID-19.
Yeah, well, thank you. Before I get into how the courts have adapted to the pandemic, I just want to go back to what you were saying earlier when we were talking about not just the vaccine or, not just COVID related, but if you remember growing up, there were always those people in the neighborhood, at least that one person that everybody went to that knew if you needed help, oh, your water about to get shut off, or you got to do this, you go here, you call here, you do that, because we knew our neighbors, we knew the community. And I think that's something that's missing in some communities, and we have to work on that because we have that gap now of knowledge of where to go to get some things done.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as the courts haven't been, they have been impacted just like all other businesses in everyone's life. COVID is real, and it has really changed how we do court. Um, I preside in criminal court, and we had to really make adjustments because we do jury trials. I did major trials in which we dealt with felonies, and you have an absolute right to a jury trial. We had to outfit the courtroom. So first of all, we had to limit the courtrooms that were accessible for jury trials,
Mm-hmm.
and where we could do everything in one room. Now we had to do it in three rooms because everyone has to be spaced out. Everyone can't sit in a jury box, and now we had to have plexiglass
Mm-hmm.
in the on the desk where the attorney sit as well as the defendant, and in the jurors boxes and the judges bench as well. It impacted the number of trials that we can do because before COVID, every courtroom was up and running and we can all do our own list.
Right.
Now we're limited into the number of jurors we can even bring into the building. So that lowers it. And then with COVID, obviously some people have medical holds or they have been stricken with COVID, so they can't come to court.
Mm-hmm.
But what I will say that I noticed that in some instances, like especially in family court, they saw participation go up because people could participate on Zoom. They didn't have to take a
Wow.
full day off of work. They can just now go to their allotted time, Zoom in, and have their time with the judge and then go back to their work. And
Mm-hmm.
criminal, especially with trials, we're not allowed to do that, obviously, because there are constitutional limitations. But we opened up because all courtrooms are public. In
Mm-hmm.
adult court, we had to open up special rooms that when we have jury trials or we have trials, you can go and view that trial because the public has an absolute right to see that. So we made a lot of adjustments, but we've been really busy in maneuvering that way. We didn't stop. The court never shut down. Even when COVID came, we were still working. Was it different? Absolutely, but we were still working.
I think that's amazing how you shared that if once people were accessible to technology, they were able to participate more. We hear that through a lot of the spaces that we're in, and then we hear the other side where because of technology, it excludes a lot of folks. So I think we always have to keep in mind that there are two sides to what is shifting in our world, and I love it when we're able to share the upside of it and how people are it alleviates pressure
And
for
I
a
want to
lot
say
of
this too, because I dealt with domestic violence and rape cases, human trafficking victims. They have an opportunity to give their testimony, and some of them felt more comfortable doing that on Zoom. They didn't want to be in the same room with the
people.
person who had inflicted that upon them. So in that way, that was also a great comfort to some people.
Awesome, awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
Pastor, what have you seen as it relates to how this has impacted the church, and what are some of the upsides and the things that we've been able to benefit from as it relates to COVID-19?
Well, what I've discovered in the church community is well, are a number of things. One, COVID caused us to pivot, to move to a method to change not the message, but the method by which we administer the message. For some ministries who weren't community focused, they took a big hit because they were primarily focused on the Sunday morning experience. And I try to share with my colleagues and even the church that ministry is bigger than Sunday morning.
Yeah.
Sunday morning is more so the injection that we give you to be successful during the course of the week. You need those programmatic experiences during the course of the week to support the ministry. And one of the things that I can say Bright Hope has been successful on is having those community outreach opportunities that really minister to the community. I was looking at the chat and somebody mentioned about the mega church versus the local church. And it's clear that there has been a booming birth of mega churches. Mega churches had a bad taste in some people's mouths because it lost the connectivity.
Mm.
I came from Memphis, Tennessee, homegrown, and my pastor there, who now rested in the bosom of the Lord, was Pastor James L. Nanners, in which he was one of those close connecting points with Dr. King from Memphis. He was the city councilman that brought him there during the sanitation strike, right? And then that night they voted the council persons voted to give them their wages, but then he was assassinated. So they couldn't really tell the city that we voted to approve it because they would assume that it was based upon him being assassinated. My pastor had 5,000 members present every Sunday. And every Sunday, what he would do, he would stand down at the pulpit, shake hands with all of them, call them by their names. So we have some churches who are doing the work, big or small, but then there are those who really lost the connectivity because they don't have the programmatic support to support the ministry. And I tell my leadership that we got to be intentional about not moving too quickly because we have a vulnerable population, and I don't want our vulnerable population to succumb to COVID-19 because we're trying to put people back in the pews.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah. Safety first, safety first. We've seen our communities, I know Juan has shared his testimony on social media. Whole families have really had a hard time with this virus, and we have to be sure and be careful that we are not putting people at risk in the name of just getting together in person just to say that we've done it, right? Operating with wisdom alongside faith. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. I've seen a lot of churches have smaller groups to keep people connected as well virtually. And I appreciate you sharing that it's just not about Sunday.
well, let me just say this, and I want to be clear, since I know this will be this is a live event, that I am not speaking down against any church that does have live services. No, I'm saying that in the best interest of me as the pastor of Bright Hope, I feel that it's in the best interest of us to really chew on it a little longer until we find ourselves comfortable to have open worship. So I'm not speaking down against any other church that does have in-person worship.
Thank you for that, Pastor. Thank you for that. Mike, wanted to ask you a little bit about how we can help people make the connection between vaccination and serving our community, keeping our communities healthy, and the messaging around that, right? There's something about the way we process information, the way it's fed to us. And I would say that sometimes we're not necessarily approaching it with love and the nicest way to get people to understand the importance of vaccination. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the approach and the messaging around that.
Yeah, I think couple quick things. One is people rely on who they trust, right? They will rely on the words of people they trust before they rely on the words of scientists. That's just the reality of the world that we live in. And as Black people, that's, you know, even more complex for us because science hasn't always been our friend. It was actually weaponized against us in many ways. And I say this as a person that's like steeped in science and sits in the sciences and studies them and is doing research, right? So I recognize the gift that the sciences have brought us as a species, because science predates colonialism, science predates Europeans, science predates, you know, even the ways that we've constructed our understanding of the place that we call Africa, right? Like science is very, 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 very old. People have been trying to understand the world and everything in it. So for a very long time. So I use that as a foundational background for how I think about operationalized science, and then how I think about talking to people about science. I think about who, right? Audience matters. Families are diverse as Jacks, and they come in all shapes and sizes. And we, you know, if you're trying to get people to think about their health, that has to start with respecting families and the ways that they are choosing to organize, even if it's outside of what I believe is cool or right. If the goal is to center the conversation on health, then that has to be the main focus, right? And if that health includes information that's already pretty quote unquote controversial or steeped in a lot of misinformation and disinformation, like you've got to make and design that space for the conversation to be one that is full of clarity and full of like, you've got to remove as many obstacles as possible. And so again, trust is what's going to help you get into those spaces, to get people to hear you or see you or humor you in a different way, or to think about information through a different lens. But you got to build for that. And I think that's part of the challenge right now, is we're not investing in relationships with people. It goes back to what I mentioned with the young people, right? And you got to have multiple tactics because there are multiple groups and types of people and families, et cetera. And so I think for some folks, and, you know, I'm going to say something, and hopefully this isn't offensive. Philadelphia is a dense religious city.
Mm-hmm.
There are a ton of folks that practice Islam, and there are varying versions of Islam that they're practicing. Same with Christianity and tons of denominations and everything in between. And then people that don't practice anything. And if we're centering health first, how well are we working on ourselves to make space for someone else, however they choose to identify, to get access to the information in a trusting space to then get to the health that we're looking for as an outcome? Like, we've got to practice operationalizing love to a new level now. It has to go beyond dogma. It has to go beyond my beliefs about what's best for you and how you're going to develop. Like, at a certain point, I have to learn to listen in a new way to then communicate with that person to get what I want in terms of the landing of the information, to get that there. Otherwise, you know, we'll just keep self-blaming each other as a community, and we're living in fractured communities, right? When you talk about can't go to the neighbor, can't go to that, we're go to this place for X or Y. We're living in hyper fractured neighborhoods from a public health perspective. We talk about violence as begetting social fragmentation. However, social fragmentation also begets violence. So it's like a chicken and the egg thing. Which one is first? Which do you address? You actually just have to address both at the same time, and be as complex as the problem is, how we think about solving and organizing for people's humanity in the context of the work.
He's just so super smart. Isn't he so super smart, guys? You just put it where as Joe Madison put it where the goats can get it. I see Brandon. One thing I know about a man, if he's touching himself, he's thinking, and he's got Brandon, what say you? Because it seems like you have something you got to get off your chest around this topic.
So, well, thank you. I didn't know that my demonstrative nature was that easy to decipher. You know what? Let me come at this from a different way. Okay. I want to thank COVID. I want to thank COVID for making it obvious about food insecurity. I want to thank COVID for lifting up the digital divide that we have in communities of color. You know, I actually, even though everybody wants to talk about COVID from a negative, I see that COVID has allowed these larger conversations to take place. You know, just to say that our schools were to go virtual is not just a sentence without the plan. I mean, we all know that, you know, a vision without a plan is nothing but a hallucination. So, you know, I just think that it's just sort of those things that we don't think about, That in truth, in truth, I just want to thank, COVID for bringing up, or bringing to the surface, all of these things that a lot of us knew existed. Because, food insecurity existed pre-COVID.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All right. The digital divide existed pre-COVID. But it's interesting when things are now, when they impact people on a global standpoint, that now all of a sudden it wants to get lifted up to a conversation of humanity. But when it was only impacting a certain set of people, humanity wasn't an issue. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm just gonna I'm gonna I'm gonna stop, I'm gonna I'm gonna stop right there. I'm just gonna stop right there.
No, look, a vision without a plan is nothing but hallucination. That is a quotable. And Pastor, you look like you got something you want to add
No,
to
I was
that.
going to say that, Brother Brand. I'm going to give you credit when I use it. That's all.
Yeah, we definitely, I hope everyone is taking notes, because this is what we're talking about, guys. We know our issues, we know what we're up against, but the question is, what do we do now? And what I'm hearing is, we need to operationalize love.
Mhm.
We need to create spaces for people, young people, 30 and under. And then when we invite them into those spaces, we give them the opportunity to shape what that space looks like.
Miss
I'm
Crippen, can I add something?
Absolutely.
So we got empathy, right? But can I say that there is something else that's so important that we're never taught, and that's
What's
how to
that?
listen. So let me
Mm.
just let me just say it like this. If you've ever had a conversation with someone and you're thinking about your response while the person is talking, you're not listening.
Mhm.
There is a sense of emptying that has to take place so that you're allowed to be present, so
Yes.
you can actually hear what's being shared with you,
Mm-hmm.
right? But oftentimes what happens, we hear something and then we want to go straight for that. But in truth, we might have missed a whole lot of other bits and pieces of jewelry and preciousness, because we wanted to get that statement in. So
Mhm.
if people are writing things down, I say, one, we have to learn how to listen. And I think the other thing is that sometimes it's all right not to have a response.
Right.
You do not have to fill up a space with something trite, with something trivial, with something sympathetic. Sometimes the best thing to say is like, wow, I don't even know what to say to that.
Right.
Like what I
Right.
said after Mike just dropped all those nuggets. Like, hey, I was dialed in. I heard nothing else said to that. That was a perfect response, right? So,
Could I
yeah,
add something briefly to what Brandon said?
absolutely.
Because Brandon, I appreciate that part. You're talking also about this idea of bearing witness, and at a time when the trauma is through the roof, and people are getting gaslit on their experiences, gaslit on experiences of racism, gaslit on experiences of sexism, homophobia, transphobia. I mean, go down the list, right? Classes are just gaslit. Like, we have to, and this was true before COVID, but even more true now, we have got to make the space to literally bear witness to the suffering of other people,
Mm,
Mhm.
right? And
mhm.
make space to sit, to your point, Brandon, like not having something to say for the purposes of sympathy or trying to fill the space because it's uncomfortable. Just like literally sitting in it and bearing witness to the suffering that people are living through. You should be uncomfortable. It should not be comfortable to see a bus full of people who are experiencing homelessness have to ride a bus all night because it's that cold outside, because we failed in housing policy since prior the days of King, right? Like that's a reality that we're going to need to sit in, not try to get ourselves into a comfortable place with because, oh, we got a new program and some federal funds. Like we got to sit in the reality and bear witness. I appreciate what you just said.
In the hallways of academia, the divinity schools and seminaries, it's called the ministry of presence.
Mm,
Hmm?
Not trying to form a deep thought, but just to listen and to
mm,
be present. That's one of the tough lessons that my pastor taught me early on. Yeah, you got all these degrees, but it's good to just listen and say nothing. I
Mhm.
learned that the hard way 15 years ago when I married my wife. I wanted to give a response every time she said something. My pastor said, son, you'll win a lot of fights if you just sit there and say nothing. So, Brother Brandon, that resonates real, and well with me to learn how to hush and listen.
But if I can, Pastor, real quick before Miss Crippen takes us to a different direction, I think, we say things, but oftentimes we don't try to unpack the implication. Just the simple things that we're talking, it is a cultural shift. Because the way that I learned how to talk, I learned that from my mother, who learned that from her mother, who learned that from her mother. The way that I've learned to respond and interact, I learned that from my father, who learned that from his father, who learned that from his father. So when we're talking about changes, it's not just a change in me, it's a change in just the whole generational psyche, the intergenerational psyche, the spirits. I mean, you can talk about epigenetics, whatever fancy word you want to put into this conversation. We are the embodiment of present and past. And oftentimes that change is monumental. Learning how to be quiet when you've been told to fill the space up with sound, it is empowering, it is impactful, but it is also very hard. Because they say the simplest things are the hardest things to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm gonna let Juan chime in on this because I know this is one of your spots, Juan.
Yeah, well, being a black therapist is difficult. You know what I'm saying? Because I'm from the hood. I'm from the projects. Westfield, I was born and raised. And growing up, all my friends used to always say, "You were always our therapist because you always would just listen to our problems." So when I went to school to become a therapist, I had to understand what being an active listener meant. Because I always wanted to help fix everybody's problems. Because in our community, you always look for a fixer, somebody who can fix what's going on. But to be an active listener and just sit there and then, as the pastor said, not say anything. Once I got married, I understood the same thing. Like, I can't, you know what? Instead of fighting, I could just shut up. So once I learned how to communicate with the demographic and my folks, because I went back to school to become a therapist so that my community can have somebody who looks like us, who came from where we came from, who can relate to what things that we go through. Because to wear this skin every day and be a black man, unless you wear this skin, you don't understand it. You can't tell me reading a book can tell you, like King marched, so he understood what it meant to wear the skin and march out there, and then also to empower the young people to follow his dream. You know what I'm saying? Because the thing about it is, how do we empower this next generation to follow their dreams? Because right now, the only dream they following is a gun. Like, we see it all day long. So we have to understand, like, where do we come from as far as therapists and as listeners and as parents and it's just influencers on this next generation. Well, how do we help them? We help them by figuring out, what do they need help with? Ask the question. My whole thing is, ask the question. What do you need help with? We don't never really, we just try to answer the question instead of sitting back and saying, what do you need help with? And a lot of times working with these young people, they want to tell you.
Yep.
When I work in a youth study center, they tell me that they looking for a leader, somebody to follow, but they following another 15-year-old or another 17-year-old.
Yep.
And you know what? If I can just piggyback off of that one, because I do this program called ACE, where we go into public schools and teach civics, because that's a component that's missing.
Yes.
A lot of kids want to effectuate change. They have all these ideas, but they don't understand necessarily how to do it. And we have to go back to the 3 branches of government. Why they're important. What do they do? If you want to bring about this change, you got to know the system and you got to know how to do it. And I think that is a part that's missing that we have to keep talking about. People, when, because I'm a judge, and a lot of people don't understand in Pennsylvania, we're elected. You sit there and they complain about, oh, the judge, they're this and that. You put us there. So when we run, show up to a community forum. Pay attention to what we're saying, because as judges, we're so restricted, and judicial candidates, and what we can say and do. We can't run on this platform and do all these things, but you can see our body of work, see where we're from, see the things that we're doing, and see what we care about and what's important. And you can tell by where we volunteer and the different jobs that we have taken. So, and when I talk to kids about it, they don't even know that we're elected. And they think that, even some adults, oh, I vote every 4 years for the president. But they keep forgetting local elections matter, because that's a direct impact on you. Especially a judge, we can take away your liberty, your kids, your family, your money, your house. That's big stuff right there. And the mayor, everybody, who are they appointing? The police chiefs. People don't understand that all these elections have consequences. and we can see what they do. So we have to make sure that our youth and our adults feel empowered to make sure that their voice is heard. But to do that, they also have to be educated to do it the right way. We don't want people running in circles, because if they want to effectuate change, we need to see it. But sometimes they just don't know what they don't know. And that's what we're here for, because we all
Thank
got to
you.
teach one another.
Yeah.
Thank you, Judge, for bringing up the voting, because if it's one thing King was about, is using your power to vote. And there's
Yes.
so much that controls what our day-to-day lives and local politics and local voting, that we have to make sure we're participating. And thank you to everyone in Philadelphia for voting in Judge Tamika Lane. I appreciate everyone who
Thank
participated,
you.
because when we see people who look like us on the bench or in the court, anywhere in the courtroom, it gives a different vibe. I've seen different types of conversations when we're equally represented in those rooms. And so I just want to thank you for what you're doing and everyone who did participate. And this conversation is getting hot and heavy, okay? I'm going to give us a quick break, because I did promise everyone, guys, that I was going to give away some free stuff. Everyone's looking forward to it. I hope everyone is ready for the next trivia question, because it's free. It's free. And all you have to do is answer the question. So do you mind, panel, if I throw in a trivia question to show some love to the people in the chat? Everyone,
Not at
show
all.
the panel some love in the chat, because I am loving the information that they are giving us. So this next question, okay, this is a tough one. I did not know this. What was MLK's birth name? What was his birth name? Okay, because it was not, okay, Martin Luther. It wasn't. And when I learned this, I was floored. And I think it's pretty cool, to be honest with you, because it's kind of like, he was a rock star in a sense for the people and civic engagement. And so he got to have alias and go by a different name. So drop your answer in the chat, okay? What we know MLK would have been his handle on Instagram, but what was his government? What was his government? So I've seen a panel laughing. Raise your hand if you know the answer on the panel. Raise your hand. Oh, that's a good question.
I know the answer, because Martin King, he was the drum major for justice. He was the ace of the Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated.
No, you were doing so well. Pastor, just when we were talking about inclusion. What are you doing?
I know, wait. Okay, so since he got to plug his frat, I know we got a lot of Greek on this.
Right?
But it would only be true that the people that perceive themselves to be first, that they would make comments.
Somebody right.
I'm just saying. So Juan, if you want to go, I mean, it doesn't matter.
Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated, Newts in the building.
Newts in the building.
Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated.
Okay, the diamonds up in there.
Diamonds.
Yeah, and of course, last but not least, would be that Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated, founded January 9th, 1914 on the campus of Howard University.
Can you tell how many people have been crossed? Okay.
Let's just put that out there. Pastor, I thought we were going to get through this, but I want to thank you that we done pulled the cork off the bottle.
I saw one trying to rep with the little Kappas. I wanted to just
you already know I got to. I got to be on there.
If you any Greek in the chat today, rep your Greek. I know how you all are. I want to give y'all opportunity, rep your fraternity, sorority, organizations. Thank you to Black fraternity, Black Greek. A lot of the work has continued through those organizations.
Absolutely.
All of the service work. all of the leadership that we're seeing. I really love how we've been able to maintain Greek life in the Black community and continue to groom our leaders through those organizations. So thank you all for your service. Um, we did ask a question though, so I don't know if you guys saw it. Michael King
Mel,
Jr. is his real
Michael
name,
King.
y'all.
Michael King Jr.
Michael King Jr.
Wow.
So
It's a very good name.
he was born on January 15th, named after his
Capricorns.
father. When younger King was 5 years old, his father decided to change both their names after learning more about the 16th century theologian Martin Luther, who was one of the key figures in the Protestant Reformation. Inspired by that battle, Michael King soon began referring to himself and his son as Martin Luther King. So you learned something today. Great.
Absolutely.
Thank you for participation, and congratulations to Ms. Willingham for winning that copy of the book. Okay. So going back to our discussion, all right. I want to ask the major question that we came here to answer. Going around the room, I want to give everyone the time to really give me your best vision. I want everyone to close their eyes, try to imagine, okay, if Dr. King was still here with us, okay, and he's here in spirit because we see it everywhere, but if he was here in the physical, what would he do, say, think, given the current climate that we're in right now? Because when you think about COVID and the way it has ripped through our communities, how violence is at an all-time high again due to the pandemic and all the things adjacent to it, health disparities are just, again, everything's being highlighted. All these things happen and they exist, and we were in a gun pandemic before COVID. We were in this horrible health crisis before COVID, but COVID has certainly shed a light on what our communities have been facing today. So I want to talk about what you think King would do. Now I'm going to start first because I'm going to let you all get your thoughts together. I'm gonna just take it from a little controversial angle. If anybody's seen that episode of Boondocks with Dr. King, I really think, I mean, he was mad back then. He was not with it. If he has zero tolerance, justice anywhere is injustice everywhere. And so when I think about what King would do or say, I see him on all the news channels because he was a speaker and he knew how to move in different spaces, especially in the political sphere. I think he would be frequently on MSNBC, CNN. He might even ruffle some feathers over at Fox. And I think he would be super vocal and just really just demolish all the talking heads on the news. I would just love to see him just, obliterate all of those folks. So that's, and I know he would really take the health system to court. I just know it. I know he would not be with any of the things that we're seeing in the way our Black people are being treated in the healthcare system. So that's my vision. Dr. King, he's angry. He might not be swearing, but he want to. And he is telling people off. Okay. That's what I think is going to happen. Pastor, what do you think?
I think that he will continue to be raising a voice to the social political issues that we're confronted with. And I think that he would have a damning statement to the church because the church in many regards is suffering with spiritual and political narcolepsy. They are asleep as to the social political realities and injustices that surrounds us. So I believe that he will continue to do the work, but also continue to push the faith community to be the voice that Luke 4:18 called us to be. So that's what I believe the reality of Martin King would be in this current climate.
Mike?
Yeah, I think it's important. So it's important to provide some kind of like scaffolding for like imagining this kind of future to me. So if you think about the last year of his life, I mean, what? So a couple of quick things he stated in an interview on NBC 11 months before he died. Excuse me, but 11 months before he was murdered. Um, he was asked a question in reference to the "I Have a Dream" speech and its new life that it took on of its own, which went away from the fact that that speech was at a whole movement about jobs, right, and economic violence. He says, "Oh, my dream became a nightmare. Like it's a nightmare now." And the optimism. The question was also about his optimism. He said the optimism I had to be replaced with realism. And he talks a lot heavily in this interview about the North and the work that was going to need to take place in the North and the work that it would take to help people begin to understand that this hyper focus on the military right now is a technique to keep us from putting out money to an extent around the issues that he's talking about, which didn't only focus on Black people, but centered Black people. It's like, if we get it right here, you'll get it right everywhere else. But this is actually about a ton of other people as well. And so if he were not murdered and that continued forward, I wonder where the world would be. We did the same thing with Nelson Mandela, right? Like the people that are lifting him up in their 80s, I look back at their profiles 30, 40 years ago and the way they were talking about him under Ronald Reagan, right? Like these kind of exercises are very difficult because people get to distance themselves from the reality of how they felt in the moment when the person was alive or when the person was doing their work. And so the truth of the matter is he might be either ridiculed and not put on TV because he would have been too polarizing to people. It would have been, you're dragging more children for. We forget the Black Panthers were children. They were 26 and under. Yep. Many of them teenagers, right? If Martin Luther King had been alive to encounter that, would the general public, including a bunch of Black people, have been okay with that? I don't know. Right. So Martin Luther King today might be being ignored. The church might not want to hear from him. Right. They might have tried to drop tapes on him and ruin and tarnish his name even more. And maybe some of that would have worked. And I think the reality is that it's kind of like Jesus, since we're on the Christian platform, it's kind of like Jesus. He wasn't glamorous at the end. Wouldn't everybody lift him up and invite him places?
Right.
So I think that's the reality of what we might be dealing with here. If he were alive today, right, it'd be a hyper push, I think, from him. But I think there'd be a ton of ridicule in trying to minimize him and sequester him as much as possible.
And if I can just add real quick. So just to add on that, many don't know that the National Baptist Convention, there was a break because they didn't want to speak up to the social ills of the community. So because of that, King broke away and then developed the Progressive National Baptist Convention. They were the people who spoke up to the social issues that confronted the community. So the church, in a real sense, many of them really didn't care about King because he brought too much light on what was going on in their sphere of influence. So they wanted to separate themselves. So I agree with what Mike is saying, that it's a strong probability that he will still be in his own silo that will push him to the side based upon the work that he was trying to expose.
Thank you for that. Juan?
I agree with Pastor and with Mike. Like I believe that, in this day and age, they always want to tear down anybody who is considered a leader in our community, and they want to do it by exposing some your personal life, not what you're doing. In this day and age, like, you can't do anything. Somebody got a camera phone on you. If you anybody, they got a phone near you waiting for you to say something or do something. And I think that they would try to minimize who he was and what he stood for in order so that he won't get the people riled up. Like, he gonna have a group of people who's gonna follow him. Like, he's gonna have a group, no matter if large or small, he's going to have some soldiers with him. Right. And he's going to have some people that agree with his ideas. Like, okay, this is what I'm going. I'm trying to move us towards this way. And even in the church, like, I've been blessed to be in many churches across the country and meet a lot of pastors and but at the same time, some of them places the issues are not being spoke about. They would rather not say. Remember how we talked about not talking? They would rather not talk. And I don't think he would be okay with how the church is today. I don't think he would be, because when we was growing up, the church was the hospital, the police station, to help you pay your bills. Like the pastor knew everybody in the neighborhood because he lived in the neighborhood.
Right.
Nowadays, like, your pastor may not know. Matter of fact, not even your pastor, the people on your block. Do you know your neighbors?
Exactly.
You can't. I ask my students all the time. Do you know the people who live on your block? 9 times out of 10, they say no. So how can you go to lock arms with them and go out there and march, and you don't even know who lives next door to you? We did stuff as a community. He can go in the community because the community was together 10, 20 years, 2, 3 generations. So you knew everybody on the block and who did what. And Mr. Brown can go speak to these people, and he can get everybody to follow you.
Exactly. And so I think when you bring up what he would say about the church, I think about that letter from the Birmingham jail, because man, what a powerful message, right? And also to the community, right? You have to work with each other and you have to speak up. And if you don't speak up, you're complicit in this whole situation. So thank you for that. Judge, what would you say? What would he do?
I think that there are so many different. He was such a complex man, so he wasn't singularly focused. But what he focused on that we can say is equality, justice, and it goes back to people. People matter. And as a judge, of course, I'm going to bring it to justice into the courts, because a lot of things happen on the ground. A lot of change happens there. But as we keep seeing time and time again, since Plessy versus Ferguson and before, everything winds up in court. And that goes back to doing our civic duty, because in Pennsylvania, judges are elected. We had to make sure our voices are heard. If we're going to see all these cases that come to court that have a direct impact on our life, we have to make sure that we elect people who believe in people, that we are all equal, that we all deserve a fair trial. We all deserve a just ruling and verdict. We all deserve to be heard. How about that? Let's start there. We all deserve to be heard in court. We deserve to not be demeaned, diminished. Maybe our English is not grammatically correct. Maybe we speak with an accent. That does not negate the words coming out of our mouth. And we need people on that bench who understand that. And Dr. King was a huge proponent of that, because that is the epitome of what justice is. And we have to make sure that we continue that legacy. We continue to uphold, because we don't want to hallucinate. So we can't have a good dream without that.
No hallucination. Like, I'm never going to forget that line. No hallucinations here. Awesome. Thank you, Judge. I just love how you always bring it back to voting, because if it's one thing that I feel super strong about, it is about voter registration, education, and participation.
And if
I
we
just
look
want
at the courts in Pennsylvania, you will see there is a lack of diversity. Now we are fortunate. For so long, we had one person of color. Now we have two, because Judge Dumas just won out of 31 judges. So we have to make sure that when we go to trial, you always hear people in the community, oh, I'm going to take it on the pill. I'm going to go on the pill. But yeah, we're not voting on judges on all these benches across Pennsylvania. Right. So we have to make sure that we have judges on the bench who are from various communities, who come from various economic backgrounds, social backgrounds, and have different life experiences, because all that matters.
Thank you. Thank you. Brandon, I'm going to give you the final thought on what you think King would do, but I also want to give us a shameless plug to your fraternity as we're talking about voting. You're one of the leaders, Mr. Joe Madison, currently on a hunger strike as it relates to our voting rights. It is real. It is serious. And I want to just thank your organization for standing with him in this fight, because what people don't know is that they are working extremely hard to take away our right to vote, especially in the state of Pennsylvania. And so I just wanted to throw that out there to you. So your thoughts, what would King do?
And let's not forget about the other prominent stigma. No offense, Pastor, but we got the John Lewis Voting Act that's still pending. So I figured I would put that out there as well. I think to answer your question, I have to come at this a different way because I am in complete agreement, but I might come at it from a different way.
Okay.
I think the legacy of King has been, it's been sanitized, it's been whitewashed, it's been romanticized, right? That he was talking about integration, which I feel that is wrong. I think that if you really read anything that he wrote, he didn't talk about integration. He talked about coexistence, which is something very, very different than integration. I think the love affair that we have with King probably would not exist because people would find out that he was not as palatable as others might have deemed him to be, right? I think he would have realized that signing a bill doesn't change behavior. I think he would have realized that servant leadership is not something that you just read from a book, but it's something that actually challenges every fiber within the community. I think he would have been a pleasant, angry person. But I think nonetheless, he would have I agree that he probably would not have been held to the highest regard that he is now because people would have he would have had the opportunity to fully unpack what he was talking about when he was talking about joblessness, when he was talking about the Vietnam War. But I think the one thing that he would always tell us to do is just listen. And listen with a full heart.
Awesome. I also agree. So it sounds like people would have been hating on King, is what it sounds like everybody's saying right now. They would have probably given him a little tough time.
I think people would have been struggling with him.
Mm-hmm.
I think because everything that he wrote was so new, and you didn't get a chance to really sit down and unpack and digest and have these conversations. And I think what happened is people sort of went off the first interpretation, and then they made that the romantic view of King. But in truth, if you read him, you would recognize that he was not as he has been held out to be, in my opinion.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking at my time, and if you couldn't believe it, we are winding down to our final minutes of today's panel. I just want to throw it out. If anyone has any final burning thoughts, comments that you want to throw out there, steps that you think people, our viewers today, could put into action, anything you want to share, thank yous. I want to go around the room for that opportunity, and then we're going to close with the final word from our pastor. In the chat, show our panel some love. They were they've just I'm in awe. I'm amazed. I've learned so much. Juan, final thoughts before we close, really quick.
My final thoughts is that we have to. I live the rest of my life, and I call it Leo, and that's love each other. Regardless of different thoughts and different sexual orientation, different backgrounds, you just gotta love on people. And love them from how you can love them. Stop trying to judge people. Just love on people, man. And the world will be a lot better place, man. If we had more love, we have less violence. That's
love is so easy to do. Judge,
you know what I'm gonna say? Vote.
That's what I'm talking about. Vote. Right, Mike?
I guess it's the other side of the vote thing. Be conscious of your money, because money was economics was the thing. That the brilliance of the civil rights movement was how they used economics to crush people and push them into accepting whatever this civil rights move of a change was. It was like, oh, you don't want to hire us? Great, we got 9,000 people organized and nobody buying your stuff.
Right. Done.
And then all of a sudden people want to have conversations, right? And I'm not saying that's the only move, but there is something to be said about organizing with money, following money and figuring out who's an ally, who's not. And I'll end here with, King in his last year is talking about 3 moral sins, moral stains, issues that this country's got to figure out: racism, economic violence against people living in poverty, and war. And the 3 are definitely interconnected. And I think there's this move to say that, oh, well, people can't understand that complexity. And I call BS on all those. I shouldn't say that. I call not true on all of that. Young people can learn those things. Older folks can too.
Thank you. Brandon?
First and foremost, I want to thank Stacey Wilson for everything that she has done behind the scenes.
Yeah.
I know that you're going to give something, and I know she's probably going to be mad at me for pointing her out. But I always show love for the one that is behind the scenes doing everything and anything possible to make everyone else look good. So I'm just saying thank you, Stacey. I think the other thing, and I'm going to leave on a mentoring note because I think this is usually one of the things that I always find to be very interesting. I say, well, if you really want to know what a mentor is, go to where you first find the word, right? And you actually find the word in Greek mythology, right? It's in the Iliad. There's a general. He's about to send his son off to war. He leaves his son with a trusted friend whose purpose was to guide them through certain parts of their life. What was the friend's name? Mentor, right? So I use all that to say, like, oftentimes when we sit there and when we try to come up with this power structure of mentor, go back. Like, it tells you what you're supposed to be. You're supposed to be a trusted friend, which means you have to build the credit, the merit, and the awareness to meet someone halfway. Not that it's all about you, but it's about them. And I'm not saying that it necessarily has to be a younger person, Judge. It could be someone your age, right? So the whole thing is that if you want to get into the mentoring space, it is often absent of your ego.
Absent of the ego. Awesome. Well, wonderful, wonderful final word. Thank you, panel, for joining us. I had a great time. I've been known to call people back after I have a good time with you. So plug in my phone number. I might send you a text at a later date for another great conversation. I'm going to let you all get back to your evening. And Pastor, let's close everyone else out. I know that you have a special gift for giving a prophetic word. And I'm asking if you could leave us with your prophetic word for 2022. What does the Lord want us to know?
Before I say that, I want to say how important it is that you call your senator tomorrow to bombard him or her. I know that in our great Commonwealth, we have Toomey and Casey. We need to get on the phone and call Toomey tomorrow because we're having a conversation with our congressional delegates tomorrow at the church around this whole ideal of the John Lewis Voting Advancement Act. It has to pass tomorrow.
Has to.
We're at a critical crossroad that if we don't take advantage of this opportunity, we will miss it. How important it is for us to bombard our senators to let them know that we put them there, and it's very important that they honor this sacred task of voting. It has to be strengthened, and John Lewis has done the work, and there's no sense of them praising John Lewis now that he's deceased, but want pass the bill. So it's very important that we do that. Now, you mentioned about a prophetic word.
Hold on. But Pastor, before you do that, because this is my jam right here. And we talk about getting involved with politics. 5 Calls app. If you don't know how to contact your senators, 5 Calls app. It's an app you can download. You can get that information quickly and call, write a letter, bombard, because we have to pass this. So thank you for taking the time out to say that, Pastor. Okay.
Yeah, I'm to be clear, my doctoral dissertation was around prophetic preaching, and I'm very sensitive to this whole ideal of prophetic word, because when you look at it from an Old Testament construct, the prophetic word was the judge or the prophet speaking to the current conditions and the climate of the social inequities of that time. Individuals then take, in this modern day of Christendom, take the word, prophetic word, to speak into your future, that tomorrow you're going to get $1,000, or if you sow this seed. So I'm very ginger with this ideal of prophetic word. And I want to be clear when people say, what is God saying to you? God hasn't said anything to me, right? But I just believe that in this particular age, it's very important that as the people of God, the people that God has called to lead variant organizations and ministries are not guilty of spiritual malpractice. It's very important for us to understand that God is concerned with the spiritual as well as the social. I alluded to it earlier, Luke 4. It sets the framework as to what we are to do. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he's anointed me to preach the gospel, the good news to the poor. He set me to proclaim the freedom of prisoners and recover the sight of the blind, to set the oppressed free. It is our responsibility as Dr. Gardner Taylor would say, have a newspaper in one hand and a Bible in the other. Ability to be alive and alert to the social realities of our community, our world, because we will do our ministries and our members injustice if we do not speak truth to power to the issues that they're confronted by. So my hope is that, as I said earlier, that we are not found guilty of spiritual, social, and even political narcolepsy. It is time for us to wake up and do something. It is time for us to get to work and do it.
Wonderful. Well, I appreciate that, Pastor. Thank you so much for joining us today. I had a good time, and you all show Pastor some love in the chat. I'm going to let you get back to your evening, because if it's one thing that I know, a pastor's work is never done. So
absolutely,
you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much. In closing, vote, because if we are not intentional about this coming election, we will have Dr. Oz as the senator. And surely we cannot take leap years backwards. It is time for us to vote. It is time for us to do the work, to register to vote. And I saw in the chat somebody stated the statistics that it's 18% in Philadelphia that voted. That's horrible. We have to really do the hard work of voting, registering individuals to vote, and changing the dial of the voting numbers in our communities. I'm sorry for being on that tangent in my soapbox. Thank you, Sister Letitia. As always, you did a phenomenal job, and the panelists were exceptional. We can even open the door of the church now. All this preaching that was going on today. Thank you, Sister Griffin. I really appreciate you so very much.
Thank you. We love you, Pastor. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, wow, that was powerful. I want to thank everyone for hanging in with us over the last hour and a half. I want to thank the panelists. I want to thank our pastor. I want to thank Temple University, Fly Life Productions, and Bright Hope Baptist Church for making sure that we are having meaningful conversations about what we can do to better serve our communities. And for those of you who don't know, if you want to get vaccinated, you can go to Bright Hope Baptist Church every Friday from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. You can go to Bright Hope to join any of their ministries that help. They feed the community. They have young people who are doing great things. And Bright Hope is very, very engaged and in tune in creating spaces for everyone to thrive. And on that note, I am closing this out. You all have a wonderful, safe evening. And thank you for joining us for this discussion around what would King do.